The West's evolving perception of Africa. A critical look. For centuries, Africa has been a land of mystery, often misunderstood. Genuine, or is it just another chapter in a long history of Western interests shaping the narrative? In this video, we take a deep dive into how the West sees Africa today, the stories that have shaped this perception, and the untold realities of a continent that refuses to be defined by outsiders. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll see Africa in a way you never have before. The old narratives, darkness, poverty, and despair. For a long time, the West viewed Africa through a narrow lens, one that painted the continent as a place of suffering and backwardness. Early European explorers described it as the Dark Continent, implying mystery, danger, and savagery. Later, colonial rulers justified their exploitation by portraying Africans as uncivilized people in need of Western guidance. Fast forward to the 20th century, and not much changed. Western media often focused on famine, war, and disease. Hollywood played its part too, showing Africa as either a wild jungle full of exotic animals or a place of endless conflict. But here's the truth. Africa is far more than the stories the West has told about it. And now a new narrative is emerging, one that is both promising and deeply complex. The new Africa, a continent on the rise. In recent years, there's been a noticeable shift in the way Africa is perceived. Headlines about Africa rising have become more common. Reports highlight booming economies, technological innovations, and a growing middle class. Cities like Lagos, Nairobi, and Kigali are being compared to global tech hubs like Silicon Valley. African entrepreneurs are making waves. From Nigeria's fintech boom to Kenya's mobile banking revolution, innovation is happening at an incredible pace. Countries like Rwanda are leading in sustainability, and South Africa continues to be a global powerhouse in business and entertainment. The West is now paying attention not just as a source of charity, but as a serious player in global economics. But here's the question. Is this shift in perception real? Or is it just another way for Western interests to reshape Africa's story? A critical perspective: who controls the narrative? Despite the positive changes, Africa's story is still often told by outsiders. Western media houses still dominate global news, and many documentaries about Africa are produced by non-Africans. Even when Africa is shown in a positive light, it's often from a Western perspective, focusing on what benefits foreign investors rather than what empowers local communities. Take, for example, China's growing influence in Africa. Many Western narratives paint this as a new form of colonialism, warning Africans about debt traps. But African leaders see things differently. They argue that China offers infrastructure and investment without the political conditions the West usually imposes. The real question is, why does Africa need outsiders to tell its story at all? A story from the heart of Africa. To truly understand this, let's step away from politics and statistics. Let's tell a story. The story of Kwame and the lion's gaze. In a small village in Ghana, a young boy named Kwame grew up listening to stories from his grandfather. His favorite was the tale of the lion's gaze. Kwame, his grandfather, would say, "The lion is the king of the jungle. Not because it is the strongest, but because it decides how it is seen. It does not let the hyenas define it. It does not let the vultures shape its story." Kwame took these words to heart. As he grew older, he saw how the world outside viewed Africa. He watched news reports that only showed starving children and war-torn landscapes. He saw movies where Africans were always side characters in their own land. But Kwame also saw something else. He saw his mother, a farmer, using mobile banking to sell crops to customers in Accra. He saw his sister, a software developer, creating apps that helped businesses grow. He saw his friends, young and ambitious, starting companies, creating music, and changing the world. Kwame decided to do something about it. He became a filmmaker, telling stories that showed the real African, just the struggles, but the triumphs. Not just the past, but the future. One day his documentary was screened in New York. A journalist approached him and said, "This is incredible. I had no idea Africa was like this." Kwame smiled and replied, "That's because for too long, you have only seen us through the eyes of the hyenas. It's time to see Africa through the lion's gaze." Africa's future. Who will tell the next chapter? The West's perception of Africa is evolving, but the question remains, who will control the narrative? Africa is not waiting for permission to tell its story anymore. A new generation of filmmakers, journalists, entrepreneurs, and leaders is reshaping the narrative from within. They are proving that Africa is not just a land of potential, but a continent of achievement. If you're watching this, remember, the way you see Africa matters. Challenge outdated perceptions. See, Captain Ibrahim is redefining financial independence. What would you do if you were leading a nation struggling with economic challenges, dependency on foreign aid, and a lack of financial inclusion? For Captain Ibrahim, the answer was simple yet revolutionary. Create a new institution to centralize resources, empower local communities, and build a foundation for economic independence. Welcome to the story of Burkina Faso's Treasury Deposit Bank. Today, we're exploring a game-changing moment in Burkina Faso's history, the official launch of the Treasury Deposit Bank under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim. It's a bold step, signaling a shift not only in how the country manages its finances, but also in how it envisions its future. This story isn't just about Burkina Faso. It's about the larger movement of African nations reclaiming their economic sovereignty. Let's dive into how this bank works, why it's so significant, and what this means for the people of Burkina Faso and, potentially, the entire African continent. The context. Why Burkina Faso needed the Treasury Deposit Bank. Let's start with the big question. Why did Burkina Faso need its own Treasury Deposit Bank in the first place? For years, Burkina Faso, like many other nations in Africa, has faced numerous financial challenges. Managing public funds has been inefficient. Resources have been scattered across various accounts, and rural communities have been left out of the traditional banking system. At the same time, the country has been heavily dependent on external financial assistance, aid, and loans from international organizations or foreign governments. While this aid has helped address short-term needs, it often comes with conditions that can limit a nation's autonomy and stifle long-term growth. Dependency on external assistance creates a vicious cycle. Loans come with interest, which eats into national budgets. Development projects may be funded, but they are often dictated by donor priorities, not the needs of the people on the ground. For a country like Burkina Faso, rich in potential but economically constrained, this system has been unsustainable. Another major issue is financial inclusion. According to recent statistics, a large portion of Burkina Faso's population lives in rural areas, where access to banks or financial services is either limited or non-existent. Without access to credit or savings tools, small businesses and farmers struggle to grow.